So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. We really, really appreciate our speakers being here, as well as each and every one of you. Our three panelists gratefully accepted the invitation to share with us the work they have been doing at the border, different places along the border, how that work has shifted as a result of the current administration and what might be on the horizon moving forward. Our three guests tonight are Episcopal priest Mike Wallens from the Diocese of the Rio Grande. Mike works in the Big Bend area with the Rio Grande Borderland Ministries and is the vicar of St. Paul's in Marfa. Andrea Rudnick is a former educator and currently the volunteer coordinator with Team Brownsville, an organization that helps asylum seekers in Brownsville, Texas, as well as those waiting in the Mexican cities of Matamoros and Reynosa. And Andrea can correct any of that when we get to her. An Episcopal priest and canon, Lee Curtis of the Diocese of the Rio Grande Valley, who works with Rio Grande Border Ministries as well, and he is in El Paso. So we will have that perspective. Here's how the next hour will unfold. Father Jonathan Wickham, our rector, will kick us off with prayer right on time. There he is. After our prayer, our panelists will each present for about 10 minutes. Mike will speak first as he needs to go to an executive council meeting. After all the speakers have spoken, I will facilitate asking a question that has been put into the chat or calling on someone whose hand is raised. And Alice may help me with that if I need some support. So if questions are bubbling up for you while you're listening to our presenters, you can drop them into the chat or you can jot it down on a piece of paper and hold on to it, because we want to make sure we have time to hear from each of them before we get to questions. Are we good to go? All right, excellent. Father Jonathan, can you start us off with a prayer?
Good evening, everybody. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
O God, you made us in your own image and redeem us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infects our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us and unite us in bonds of love. Help us to eliminate our cruelty to our neighbors, especially immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers who live with injustice, terror, disease, and death as their constant companions. Work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time all people may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Jonathan. So, Father Mike Wallens, can you kick us off, please?
Okay, thank you so much for all of you being here. We at the Rio Grande Borderland Ministries have found out that unless people come down to the border or are willing to listen to how we live and move and have our being down here, they tend to go with what the media and or politicians say, and in many cases that's not exactly the way it is. So I live in the Big Bend region of far west Texas, in Alpine, Texas, and that is this Big Bend sector that the Border Patrol marks out is the largest amount of border of any sector along the southern border with the fewest agents around. So what I work at doing is multiple border work. One is with the Border Patrol. I provide pastoral counseling and do some work with them on moral wounding, help develop a resiliency program with them, both for the agents themselves and if they are married, their partners, their spouses. And there's a lot of the Border Patrol, I think, is caught in the middle, and they get confused in people's minds with ICE, and those are two different organizations. I also we have a coalition that's built up out here because we're, if any of you know the area, it's pretty rural. And so the coalition is made up of various churches and individuals and organizations to support our work along the border. Previously, that work before the Trump administration meant that people would come across, the Border Patrol would pick them up, and then if they passed their credible threat, they were turned over to us, and then we would help them figure out how to get to where they were going. And the coalition would provide, in some cases, transportation to an airport, or we would get them on the right bus that comes to Alpine. And we would provide food and shelter for them until they needed to be wherever form of transportation they were going on. The people coming across have not been, has really been shut down now out here. And so then we've started once again working with the shelter in Ojinaga. Ojinaga is the port of entry that's right next to Presidio, Texas. And the mayor of Ojinaga had called because I had worked with the shelter when I first moved here. This was before COVID. And so she's trying to prepare for the people who are being deported, some of whom are being deported right now, but not in the great numbers that were predicted, at least not yet. And so we are getting her shelter there back into a good form where people could be welcome. Prior to COVID, it was used for unaccompanied minors as well as adults. And so we are fixing it up because it wasn't used. The mayor, just before the mayor of Ojinaga, when Lucy was elected, he closed it down. And so it's just a matter of putting it back into shape. And then out here also, we were working with the Shelter for Unaccompanied Minors in Pecos, Texas. And they, prior to President Trump coming into office, they were able to empty the shelter and get the minors to wherever they needed to be, whether it was with a relative, a parent, or a sponsor. Right now, the shelter is empty, and it's run by a company called Endeavors, and they are waiting to see if they will be having more minors coming in. Rumor has it, though, that it would be used instead for people who are being deported or waiting to be deported. At any time, that shelter had anywhere from 2,000 unaccompanied minors to now 0. And then we provide some support to the chaplains in a detention unit up in Sierra Blanca, which is 90 miles in the opposite direction of Pecos. And so moving forward, because people are not coming across right now, we are out here shifting our work into Mexico, into Ojinaga, and working with people who might be in the streets as well as the shelter, and hoping that it doesn't overflow into the streets. And so I think that's where we are right now. I don't know if I need to say any more. I can answer questions, but I think that's enough for now.
Thank you, Mike. We have a few minutes, so and I know this is not the protocol, but I also know that Mike needs to leave. So we have about 4 minutes. If there are one or two questions that someone might want to put into the chat or raise their hand and be acknowledged. There's a question here, Mike, about how might we in Corpus Christi help?
I would say there are two things out here. One is we're looking for bedding and everything for the shelter in Ojinaga. And that would be immensely helpful, or we're putting together a list of building materials that we need. The other thing that we have found in RGBM, the Rio Grande Borderland Ministries, is it'd be great to have people come here and be on a pilgrimage, which we put together. It starts in El Paso, comes out to the Big Bend, and sometimes goes into Las Palomas, Mexico, closer to Arizona. And that's a way to really see for yourselves what the border is actually like. And then what we ask is that you take what you've seen and heard and prayed about and take it back to your church so people get an eyewitness account rather than relying on the media or politicians for that information.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And you sent me some information about that, the
Right.
pilgrimage, so I have that. There's a question, do we have any idea what became of the unaccompanied minors? Were they all deported?
No, the ones that were in the shelter at the time none of them were deported, but we have since found that some of them, especially the ones who went to some sponsors, were being put in dangerous situations in factories and things of that nature. We, meaning the shelter, made sure that they weren't being used for sex trafficking, but this other issue. I can share with you one of the young ladies who I met with. Her name was Maria, and she, when I saw her this one time, she was just told that she was going to be reunited with her mother in New Jersey. And she didn't seem overly thrilled with that. And so I asked her why, and she said that she was thrilled to see her mom and to be with her, and then she added, but I didn't realize people didn't want me in this country. And so she said, I'm going to be going to a school where probably people don't want me there. And I'm going to be living in a town with my mom where people probably don't want me there. So that seemed to temper her enthusiasm. But she is in New Jersey and with her mom. But the shelter right now has been emptied.
Great, thank you. How about this one last question before we let you go and move on to our other panelists? Because I know there were a number of questions about this when our team met. As a matter of pastoral care, what are the principal issues for members of the Border Patrol in your experience?
It's moral wounding. The Border Patrol out here are, for the most part, very, very compassionate. And so they struggle with what their heart says and what the protocol says. And so another example, and this is when family separation was, I guess, at its height under the first Trump administration. One of the agents out here had to separate a family who he knew because he came from El Salvador, and that was extremely difficult for him, so difficult that when he called me up, he said, I can't go home to my family. I just separated a family that I couldn't, that I knew. And he said, so, and he stayed away from his family for 3 days and nights until he calmed down a little. And then, so he's with them. So that's the type of thing. There's a struggle that goes on within themselves about what they're being asked to do and what their heart says, and that's why the suicide rate is high among Border Patrol agents all over, not just here.
Thank you, Mike. It sounds like really important work that you've been doing with those folks. I know you need to head off.
Well, I'll stay here until I'm waiting for a link, and if it doesn't come,
okay. All right. Maybe the link will never come.
That's
In the
right.
meantime, we're going to move on to our other speakers. And I know, Diana, you have this question about how long a pilgrimage is. I think Mike talked about a week, basically a week going out there is how long these are. And if you do need to go, you also graciously agreed to answer any questions via email that might come up. So if you're having a burning question for Mike and he disappears, he will not be gone forever. So thank you. So we're going to move on to Andrea Rudnick from Team Brownsville. Thank you, Andrea.
Well, thank you for having me. I live in Brownsville, Texas, right down on the southern border. Our border city is Matamoros. And so I live in the Diocese of West Texas. And my journey toward border ministry and with Team Brownsville has been interspersed for the first 3 years with going through the Iona program in preparation for being ordained an Episcopal deacon and then priest. And I will say that it has been a very interesting journey. The blending together of a seminary program and border ministry has brought a lot of things to light that perhaps would have been very different had I gone to seminary separately from a border ministry. So our group came together in the summer of 2018. We came together informally, and we came together in response to family separation. We have several of the Southwest Key homes or temporary homes, I should say, for children that are separated from their parents. They have been used in different ways over time. So back in the first Trump administration, of course, there were children that were separated forcibly from their parents when the parents and children arrived into the United States. So that was one kind of separation. The other type of separation that happened later on was when parents felt very desperate about sending their kids into the United States, especially if they felt like they were not able to cross or that it was taking them a long time to cross. So some parents voluntarily sent their children across the bridge in the hopes that they would be able to be soon reunited with them. The rules in the United States are very strict about receiving unaccompanied minors. So those children were usually taken into an ORR facility, of which there are many throughout the United States. and parents were often surprised to find out that they could not get their child back very quickly. It usually took at least a month or 2 months, even if they had a relative in the United States. Just the whole process of getting the child back took a lot of time. So our work started primarily on the bridges into Brownsville. So we have 3 international bridges that come into the city of Brownsville from Matamoros. There were people waiting on the bridges to present themselves to apply for asylum. And at that time, something had just been implemented that summer, which was something called metering. It basically meant that Border Patrol agents were at the midpoint of the bridge. Up to that point, there had never been Border Patrol agents on the bridge. You would walk across the bridge, you would walk into the immigration building and present yourself, and your process would start there. But that summer of 2018, a new policy was put in place that put Border Patrol agents at the midpoint of the bridge. And so it basically meant that people were no longer able to freely access the immigration building in the United States. They hadn't actually set foot into the United States, and so they were kept back and forced to wait. The wait time became longer and longer until by the time that MPP started, which was a whole nother nightmare, people generally would wait about 2 hours. I'm sorry, about 2 months to present themselves to immigration. So MPP and metering are 2 separate things. Metering simply was something that gave Border Patrol more control about who was crossing over the bridge. And so it wasn't only aimed at asylum seekers, it was also aimed at anyone that might be crossing the bridge. So every Mexican national that was crossing had to show their papers there, their visa. Every American had to show their passport there. So it was kind of like, you could think of it like a pre-screening process. And the biggest difference between the time that we were dealing with metering and MPP is, with metering, when you finally did get to go across the bridge, you were processed through, and then if you cleared, you got to go on to your family or your sponsor. With MPP, when you crossed, you came back into Mexico in a matter of 24 hours. You would cross the bridge, you would go into the immigration building, into an area that we called the tent courts. There were buildings behind the main immigration building that had large white tents over them. So you would go in and begin the process, be given paperwork, and then you would be sent back over the bridge. So there was no staying in the United States at that point. So Team Brownsville went through many different changes in law, from the metering to the MPP, from serving people in the bus station, primarily from the detention centers, to, for a period of time, serving more people pre-MPP, where we were serving more families and children. Excuse me. To the time when MPP started, where we no longer had people coming into the bus station.
And can I interrupt you? Can you just explain MPP? There's a question. I mean, to understand what you're talking about.
So it's Migrant Protection Protocol. And if you look it up, you will see a lot of negative words used against migrants. it was not designed to protect migrants. It was designed to protect the American people from migrants. So MPP, another way that they termed it was return to Mexico.
Okay, thank you.
And it basically meant you didn't get to stay in the United States, you were just returned. And so every appointment you would have, conceivably, you would come walk back over the bridge, have your appointment, and then walk back into Mexico. Now, what put the biggest turn of events on that for us in 1.0 was COVID, because people were starting their process of MPP. They were given papers and told, okay, your next appointment is in 2 months. And so some of the people had maybe one appointment, or maybe they had 2 appointments. Then they would be given another paper and told, okay, now you're going to come back in 2 more months or 3 more months. And by the time the 3rd appointment came, we were in COVID land. And so nobody was crossing. And so it really froze everybody in place that was in the MPP process. And so it meant that the encampment stayed put, that nobody had appointments for a year until the people were finally released from the encampment. And that their legal process of applying for asylum did not continue during that period of time. And it was because of COVID, because they just weren't allowed to cross into the United States. So we served people on the bridges, we served people in the bus station, we served people then in the encampment. And when COVID hit, we were told, don't come into the encampment. You're going to either bring COVID or take COVID. And of course, we were all scared about COVID. What would happen? Would there be people in the encampment that got very sick and perhaps died? We just didn't know. So we were very cautious during that period and took every precaution, did not go into the encampment that much, but had goods and supplies delivered from Sam's in Matamoros. We had a lot of food supplies and things delivered from Sam's, for example, and from another grocery supply type of place, so that people would continue to get food, would continue to get toiletries. And then we continued to cross into Mexico at least once a week with the other supplies that they weren't able to get from the stores that we were buying from in Mexico. And we bought very large wagons. They're called gorilla wagons. I don't know if you've seen them. They're heavy metal wagons, and we got several of them so that the people that were in charge. So we had a system called free stores, the tiendas, and we paid a manager and an assistant. And basically what the manager would do is they would offload the trucks, they would divide up the supplies, and then they would give each family their rations basically for that week. And so the managers helped us a lot just to be able to distribute supplies throughout the encampment, because at that point there were close to 1,000 people there. So that continued that way throughout 2020. Nobody could move. At some point, the INM, the Mexican immigration system, did not allow any more people people continued to come, but at some point the INM said nobody else could go into the encampment. So then we had people that were trying to find housing in Matamoros. We did pay for some housing, some apartments for very vulnerable families with young children. So it was a very difficult time for all of us in the United States and in Mexico and everywhere else. And so we just had to kind of figure it out by the seat of our pants. something totally new that we had never experienced before.
Andrea, I'm just aware of time, and I'm wondering if in the last few minutes you can tell us how this has shifted right now.
Okay,
What's
so
happening?
right now, the encampment doesn't exist anymore. All the people that came out of the encampment well, almost all of the people. There were very few people that were not allowed into the United States at that point in March of 2021. Those people went on to family, to sponsors in the United States. And then we kind of started the process all over again of receiving people at the bus station, of opening the welcome center, of giving people supplies, food, clothing, paying for some transportation, some hotels, as I believe Michael spoke of doing that as well. And so right now we're in a whole new era where there is no welcome center. We are not welcoming anybody because there are no CBP1 appointments. The only people that are coming into the city are people released from the detention centers, kind of a slow trickle of people that were here prior to January 20th. And so our work has turned to Mexico, and we are supporting a shelter in Matamoros, and also we're helping support a shelter in Reynosa with other organizations. We are providing food, we are providing blankets and clothing and baby supplies. So that's where we're at right now.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Andrea. And just to bring closure to this, there's a couple questions, but I want to call on Lee. And when you say you're helping out the shelters, are you physically going there?
Yes, we are. We try to go at least once a week.
Okay.
But we also work with other asociaciones civiles, those the like Mexican NGOs, as well as a few American NGOs that come to our storage facility and pick up supplies to carry it across.
Okay.
Because you don't want to take too much, they will tax you. So we try to cross a little bit at a time, and as do other organizations.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Really appreciate it. I'm sure there will be more questions for you. Let's turn our attention now to Lee Curtis. Can you tell us from your perspective in El Paso and your role with Rio Grande Borderland Ministries?
Yeah, and actually, I think it's Donna, would I be able to share? Are you to share my screen? Sometimes it's helpful if we're looking at a map.
Yeah, understood. Alice, you can try it, Lee, and see.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. That's
All
what I
right.
needed. All right. So as this comes up,
We don't see anything yet.
oh, you will
got it.
momentarily. So as this comes up here, just to give you all a sense of where we are, and I'll bring in some of the names that Mike was talking about. So the Diocese of the Rio Grande is Texas west of the Pecos and the entire state of New Mexico. So you can see, even though the heart is down in El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, I'm currently up in Santa Fe talking with y'all. So we, the Pecos River hits just a little bit west of Del Rio. So this, right side of the screen, well, Del Rio's Diocese of West Texas, and we begin in the Big Bend, which, as Mike said, is the largest geographic Big Bend sector with the smallest force, which does go into a lot of what Mike said in the Big Bend, particularly with the territory that they cover. If many of these migrants don't encounter a Big Bend agent, they may very well be lost to the desert. And so the Big Bend, the Border Patrol agents that we encounter in the Big Bend very much are in the business of saving lives. If you see up here, this little triangle, Alpine, Fort Davis, and Marfa, is kind of the heart of the population in the Big Bend. But if you come straight down from Marfa to where Mike was talking about, you have the border crossing at Presidio and Ojinaga. That town in Ojinaga is where the shelter that Mike mentioned is. And And that's where we're starting to give some more attention on the south side and supporting them. If you move over to, oh, and just as Mike was saying, the shelter for unaccompanied minors was up here in Pecos, which is out kind of pure Permian. And the detention center that Mike has a relationship with is right here in Sierra Blanca. It's just a little kind of one, or not even one stoplight town, one stop sign town on the way out on I-10. So we cover all of that areas, the Diocese of the Rio Grande. Mike's our hands and feet on the ground out there. We also cover the New Mexico border, which goes kind of out here. You see the boot heel out towards Agua Prieta is where that changes. And then we do have a relationship with, I just missed that. We do have a relationship right here. I just went a little west with a women's cooperative in Puerto Palomas. That's not migration work that we do necessarily, but we have a long-term relationship with a women's cooperative working to kind of empower small business owners in Puerto Palomas. Most of our work, though, has been focused in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, which you can really see here. We are a long way from anything, but we're very close to each other. And so El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, for all intents and purposes, operate as one metro area. And since we started working, you know, everything that Andrea said applied to us as well, where back in 2018, asylum seekers were being left at the bus station, just kind of dropped off at the bus station in El Paso. We then created a network of shelters throughout the diocese, from El Paso out in Deming, which you can see on the screen there, kind of northwest of El Paso, all the way up to Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And then with the Remain in Mexico policy, we had to move those shelters, those shelter resources down into Ciudad Juarez. From 2019 until 2022, we worked with 2 shelters in Ciudad Juarez. The heart that you see on my screen is actually one of them. That's the church that I go to when I have a Sunday off. And so we worked with the Anglican churches in Ciudad Juarez, our communion partners in Ciudad Juarez, to help them operate 2 shelters while we were not receiving folks under MPP. That's pretty much no, you don't need to see that. That's the kind of a general geographic overview. I'll stop my screen there. And so from 2018, the end of 2018 to 2022, we were working primarily with our partners in Ciudad Juarez, where they sheltered just shy of 3,000 individuals. Beginning in 2022, as folks started coming back into the United States, we opened a shelter at one of our churches in El Paso, where from 2022 to just this past winter, we sheltered, I think 1,723 was our final number. What we've seen, though, even in the last year under the Biden administration, there were changes where the ability of people to go to the border between ports of entry and claim asylum was really limited. They implemented a program called CBP One, which was an app where you could make your asylum petition on the way up to the border. You'd be given an appointment. You'd be given an appointment at a port of entry. And from there, you had access to things like expedited work permits. So for asylum seekers, they had to be in the United States for 6 months before they could receive their work permit. People who sought asylum through CBP One were eligible almost immediately. And so whereas up until this point, we had done short-term shelter in El Paso, we switched to a longer-term shelter, meaning 4 to 6 weeks, where folks would essentially be with us until they got their work permit, and then they were able to move on to their sponsoring friends or family. After the announcement, or after the election, we had read, and I read very deeply, the Immigration and Department of Homeland Security sections of Project 2025, the document that the Heritage Foundation published in 2024. And I began to have, given the language I was hearing out of then President-elect Trump, and the language that was in this document, I started to have the suspicion that this was actually going to be their playbook, where we started, and it has been. So we started preparing for things like a complete shutdown of asylum seeking in the United States, a stop to the issuing of humanitarian parole, which is what new asylees, that humanitarian parole is the legal framework that enables newcomers, new asylum seekers to travel and stay in the United States pending their asylum hearing. The policy revision about ICE and other federal law enforcement operating in places like churches, schools, and hospitals. That's we've seen that come to pass, and what we began to prepare for was the reality that we might be looking at instead of assisting a flow of folks going north from Ciudad Juarez into El Paso and beyond, we may be looking at assisting people who are recently deported into Ciudad Juarez, or who may be self-deporting on their way home. The silver lining in all of this is we have not seen the number of deportations that we expected. So right now, just as Father Mike is working, is kind of our lead with Ojinaga, and we're rekindling that partnership as an organization. We're also starting to work again with our partners in the Anglican Diocese of Northern Mexico, to see what possibilities we might have in terms of reopening the shelter space that we had mothballed after 2022. What's making that difficult, though, is many of the partners who we've developed over these 5 years, because of the suspension of federal funding and cuts to things like USAID, many of our most trusted partners have been furloughed or let go. This time last year, there were 18 shelters for asylum seekers in El Paso. Currently, there are only 2 operating. And though we have not closed, we've mothballed our own facility just because there aren't the number of releases that we could expect, or that we had been used to seeing. So the network has been greatly reduced, including we were working on a partnership with the UN in Ciudad Juarez at one of our partner locations there. And the UN, this is the UN Organization for Migration, told us on less than a week's notice that what was supposed to be a 5-year project could not continue, because of funding that was promised by USAID that would not be delivered. And so we're seeing, while we're seeing the need reduce, we're also seeing the network of providers reduced. We're holding tight through this because we're a pretty small operation. We've not we've pushed back against expanding in some ways because of fears of kind of becoming too reliant on outside grants and things like that. But we're in a position where the landscape of providing service to asylum seekers or deportees is really difficult to navigate right now, just because most of the people who we trusted have been furloughed or let go, and the Mexican government as well. It's worth noting that there have been changes in Mexican policy about allowing folks who are seeking asylum to the northern border. What we're hearing right now is that shelters from kind of Mexico City and south to the Guatemalan border are full to bursting. But Mexican immigration authorities are not letting those folks make the northern transit. Should that ever change, we can anticipate a high level of need at the northern border again. Should something like the Remain in Mexico policy come back into place, folks may see that as a recreation of an opportunity to seek asylum, and our northern border could become quite busy again. The big change now is the network of NGOs and service providers who were there before are not going to be there. in the same way this time. So that's the big challenge that we're facing: how to rekindle the work that we've done with our Mexican partners, and how to be ready. Again, we are in very small ways, in very small numbers. We are working with folks who are either actively self-deporting or who are discerning self-deporting, and so we're trying to establish some resources for them. But in the fall of last year, I really felt like if this is the pattern that we're going to keep, we can do this forever. That the kind of shelter we provided, the kind of care that we provided for our neighbors seeking asylum had finally reached a level of sustainability, both in terms of US policy and in terms of our ability to respond to the need. All of that has changed in less than a month, drastically so. So we're in a new world and a new environment here. I think that's my time.
Thank you, Lee. Really appreciate it. Boy.
Yep.
You're exercising a lot of flexibility and creativity in response to.
I wish we didn't have to.
Yeah, I understand.
Want to make it clear, I wish we didn't have to, but yeah, that's.
And when you say we, you mean Rio Grande Borderlands Ministry,
Mhm.
which is part of the diocese and
Yeah.
funded by the diocese?
No, so Rio Grande Borderland Ministries is a ministry of the diocese, but it is entirely funded outside of the diocesan budget. So the Diocese of the Rio Grande, we've got a pretty small budget, pretty small staff, historically kind of underserved area, and so all of the resources that go into Rio Grande Borderland Ministry, into the work that supporting work out in the Big Bend, supporting work in the borderlands of New Mexico, and supporting the work we do in El Paso, that's all raised from outside of the diocesan budget. So congregations around the Episcopal Church, individuals, and then we do have grants both from the wider church, and up until recently, we were receiving reimbursements from FEMA under their shelter, under the auspices of the disaster declaration. We had been working with them, but they owe us about $35,000 that I don't know that we're ever going to see. So it's mostly from individuals and congregations around the wider church.
Thank you. Okay, there's a few questions. I'm just going to divide them up and just to invite some pithy responses from our panelists, given our time here. Mike, could you address, because you brought this up, the difference between Border Patrol and ICE, because there is confusion around that.
I'm still there.
Oh, did he have to leave? He might have
But I'm happy.
Lee,
I'm happy to
Thank you.
take
Thank
that.
you, Lee. Go
So,
ahead.
Border Patrol is Border Patrol's primary mission is the prevention of illicit substances entering the United States. They started during Prohibition, kind of as an extension of the Texas Rangers. Actually, a lot of this history comes from kind of Del Rio and Laredo, around that Prohibition era. And so their primary mission always has been the prevention of illicit substances entering into the United States. And so they operate primarily in that role anywhere there is a border, and 100 miles in from anywhere there is a border. Now that includes sea borders. So if you are on a coast, you are under the jurisdiction of Border Patrol. And y'all might remember, and this is where it gets a little tricky, prior to 9/11, what Border Patrol did and what we now have ICE do was kind of all under the INS umbrella, the Immigration and Naturalization Service umbrella. That got taken into the Department of Homeland Security when that was created. So what we largely see now is Border Patrol is they enforce entry of goods and people into the country. ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, enforces those laws in the interior of the country. Now they do overlap sometimes. So like, for example, Border Patrol doesn't operate detention centers. ICE operates the detention centers.
Okay.
Border Patrol doesn't kind of put people into deportation proceedings. Border Patrol will detain people and then process them into ICE custody, and those things will happen in ICE custody. So the detention centers, Border Patrol really can't detain people for that long a period of time. ICE is the agency that does that.
Got it. Thank you very much. Andrea, can you talk about how your organization is funded, and is there a need for support from us?
So our organization has been funded from 2018 from private funders, individual people, and some foundations that funded us. In 2022, we were allocated some monies through EFSP, which was through the United Way. We then were allocated some funding in 2023 and 2024 through FEMA, but not that long after we were allocated that funding, we got hit with, we were served by the Attorney General of the state of Texas. And one of their accusations was that we had spent FEMA money in Mexico. The good thing is that we actually had never taken any FEMA money. So, but they still want to pursue it, even though we actually didn't we were allocated money, yes, but we did not actually take it. It's a long process of doing a budget and drawing it down. So we did not actually take it. So right now we're running on private donations, and occasionally we might get a little bit larger donation from a foundation or something like that. So yes, private donations are what we are going to have to run on if we're going to continue the work at all.
Okay, thank you so much. That's good to know. There's a question, Lee, is there a legal component to your ministry? Do you have immigration lawyers helping immigrants and asylum seekers?
So this is one of the places where our partnerships were absolutely crucial. And a lot of the agencies that were providing legal support, Church World Service had a tremendous presence here. Border Servant Corps, which I believe is associated with the Presbyterian Church, had a really remarkable presence here. We were able to refer folks out to those agencies, and so never felt the need to develop our own internal legal arm.
Mhm.
And now I kind of wish we did. So that's one of those things where as this kind of, we really did rely on a network of folks who everybody kind of had their lane. Even our shelter, we limited ourselves to 25 people at a time, so that we could work pretty much exclusively with families with small children. Like that was our lane. We stayed small so we could serve a particular niche. But we all relied on this kind of interlocking network that's really broken down. So we were able to refer out to folks we trusted. Now the few agencies that are doing that are pretty overwhelmed. So we're looking for new ways to get that done.
And there's a question, do you partner with Catholic Charities or other faith-based agencies that cover the same?
Yeah, so the Roman Catholic Diocese of El Paso has its kind of charity arm. They call it Estrella de El Paso. I don't know the affiliation with. I've been told that the affiliation with Catholic Charities is not clear cut, but they do really tremendous work, and have been doing that for years. And so we do have a really good relationship with the Roman Catholic Diocese in town. And a lot of the other organizations who have moved in more recently were kind of the first ones to move out. Like I said, the Presbyterians, the Lutherans stopped operating their shelter, although still really good friends. So we're just seeing a reduction in the number of folks who are actually on the ground right now.
One last question. Do you know of serious concerns involving the cartels against migrants in Ciudad Juarez?
I haven't heard as much recently, mostly because the population is the migrant population there is down. There were some interesting experiences kind of early on in our time in Ciudad Juarez, but we haven't had any negative experiences recently. What we're seeing now is the folks who are still in Ciudad Juarez are kind of settling in to Ciudad Juarez. Even the shelter network in Ciudad Juarez is at less than half capacity right now. And the numbers of deportees who we were expecting just have not materialized. So early days, as particularly in the early days of MPP, there were some moments of we had some interesting moments. I had some interesting conversations with some interesting people, but that's really calmed down.
Mm-hmm. And finally, are you taking any legal action regarding not you personally, but taking legal action regarding the cancellation of your USAID funding?
So it was we received the FEMA funding, which that was one of those things that I believe was created by an EO, and therefore an EO kind of revoking it. From what I've been told, the legal ground on that is shaky for our FEMA funding. USAID, that really affected our partnership. The UN Office of Immigration or of Migration was the agency that held that funding. I have no idea what they plan to do. They just told us that they had to pack out.
Okay, and we have a final question for both of you. What can we as a small organization do to help you? Andrea?
We appreciate and can receive small groups of people that want to come and work with us and cross into Mexico and serve the people of the shelters that we serve in Mexico. We do a lot of preparation of the goods that we take across, just because it takes time to do that, to make sure that you have everything that you need to cross. So it's not just a matter of crossing with goods, it's also a matter of getting everything ready to go. So we do, and we can receive, like I said, small groups of volunteers, 3, 4 volunteers who want to come and spend a few days. We do a lot of distribution of in-kind goods. Some people feel better or safer giving in-kind goods. And the kind of in-kind goods that we distribute are baby supplies, blankets, toiletries, things like that. But we also do a lot of using monetary funds to pay for the supplies that we buy in Mexico. We purchase grocery supplies actually online to the Sam's in Matamoros, who can then deliver them to the shelter, and that makes it a lot easier for us to do that. We know exactly what they need, how many people are there, and we can order what's needed on a weekly basis, which we do. We spend about $1,200 a week doing that. We also some of our other funding needs are we tie in with other organizations in Mexico that work in different areas, but similarly work with, well, now it's migrants and returnees, because we realize that there's going to be this shift. There are still many migrants waiting in the shelters in Matamoros, but that's going to change. We don't know exactly when, but we are expecting that our role will, the people don't change. It's just going to be their situation changes. We will still be serving people, families, children, And we will be giving them a way to wait until they figure out whatever the next thing is.
So it sounds like there's multiple opportunities to help. And we will regroup after this and we'll be reaching out to you with follow-up questions. Lee, what might you offer?
I mean, I think it's similar to Andrea's story. We had a budget for 2025 that no longer applies. We're in the process of figuring out what our needs are financially. So that's waiting on things like, the city of Ojinaga to tell us what kind of materials they need to be built. Right now, we don't have the exact financial need. But even things like maintaining the space that we're in and the staff that we have, those kinds of particularly congregational contributions are huge. Even if we can't say, hey, here's a particular project that we can invite you to participate in right now. I anticipate by the summer we'll have that, but right now we don't.
Okay.
So supporting the ministry, the staff, and the space while we're in this discernment time it's the other thing I'll say is, just like Andrea, come see us. We have a remarkable, I think what I love about the Big Bend in particular, and El Paso also offers this in a really unique way, is there is a beauty to the border and being in the borderland that our current migration crisis has completely flattened. There is a soul to this place that is deep and abiding and bigger than any one of us, bigger than the United States, bigger than Mexico. There's a reality here that I think Far West Texas kind of speaks to in a way that, all love and deference to the RGV, but I think the desert does what the desert does and makes those differences a little bit more stark out where we are. And so, when we invite folks out, the focus on doing is good, and we have things to do. But really getting to kind of know the soul of the place, and being able to resist within your congregations or amongst your communities when folks try to flatten this into a problem. This has been happening since before the United States was a glimmer in a pilgrim's eye. And this phenomenon of human movement will be happening long after us as well. And the more we can get that into our souls and understand kind of the spiritual geography of a place, I think the easier time we have entering in to serve those kinds of spaces. So again, the short of it is, give us money and come see us, please. That's kind of where we are. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much to both of you and to Father Mike, who had to step off. We deeply appreciate taking this time to build our understanding, a beginning of understanding of what's happening, so we can educate ourselves in order to inform next steps. So we will be back in touch. Thank you so much. And to everyone here, we really appreciate you taking your time to educate yourself. March 25th, we'll be having another educational forum, Tuesday, the 25th, with Sister Norma Pimentel, the Executive Director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley. So save the date and come join us for that one as well. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank
Lee,
you.
I appreciate it. Have a good night. Bye-bye.